Hey Arunima, I just wanted to check. Should we start and then we can let more people join?
Yeah, I think we should start. I've also just hit live on YouTube, so we are live.
Great. Avinash, Deepthi, Saket, if you can switch on your video now. Yeah, super perfect. Great, thanks. Thanks so much for. Thanks, Arunima. Just want to extend a welcome to everyone who's joined the session so far. And this is our session for artists and creators. Just to let you know, the session is being recorded and it's being streamed on YouTube as well. We've just pulled up a poll on your screen, so we're hoping you can answer this question as we begin. And we'll have a couple of questions for you at the end as well. So it'll be really helpful if you could just answer the poll over the next minute. I'm very happy to introduce our hosts for this workshop. We have Deepthi, Saket, and Avinash from Quicksand Design Studio. Quicksand is a design and innovation consultancy that began in 2005, and they have studios in Delhi, Goa, and Bangalore. Their team, as you'll hear more about in just a couple of minutes, consists of entrepreneurs, anthropologists, researchers, technologists, designers, filmmakers who work together to create different kinds of health and development projects, including the It's Okay to Talk program and the Mela Museum that this event is being hosted as part of. Over this next hour, they'll be taking you through three main things. The first being just to understand a little bit more about their approach, and they use something called human-centered design and storytelling. And then they will be sharing examples with us for how they have used storytelling as a tool for health promotion. And finally, they have some tips and tricks for you, so things you can do and what creators need to focus on and consider for projects of their own. So welcome Avinash, Deepthi and Saket. I'm going to hand over to Avinash to begin the session.
Hi, Paddy. Thank you for the introduction and great to be here and share some of our work. Give me a second. I'm just going to share my screen. Then we can get going. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's get going with it. We actually have a lot in store, so hopefully we will make it in time for the 45 minutes we have. So the topic of our presentation, like Paddy mentioned, was looking at the intersection of what one might call human-centered design or HCD, or in general, just design thinking, I guess, and storytelling in the context of health, and with a deep dive into mental health specifically and the creation of comics that constitute the Mela project. I'm joined here by my colleagues Deepthi and Saket, and they'll take over from me in about 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do in this first section is to just give you a really quick idea, or just for people who might not know or not familiar with the term human-centered design. It means many things. There's a lot of talk around it globally, etc., etc. But for us, it just means three simple things. It's meeting people, telling their stories, and crafting experiences on the back of things we learned. So the work that we do in Quicksand, it takes us across in the length and breadth of India. We've done a lot of work in parts of Africa and Asia and so on. And one of the most enjoyable parts of this process as a studio has always been the chance to meet people from various cultures, from various sections of society, and talk to them about a wide variety of issues that they might be experiencing, or just the life that they're experiencing at any given point. What we do with the people that we meet, we essentially follow a process that includes sometimes observing them, sometimes chatting with them in interviews, sometimes doing focus groups, sometimes doing activities as is shown in the middle here, the lady, which is a project on finances at home. And what we do with this material is often try to not make long, boring reports and dense material that sometimes gets stuck in just shelves and libraries and so on. We try to make stories from the work from the lives that we see around us, and often these stories take various different forms. They often take the form of print publications, sometimes microsites, sometimes animation films, documentary films, photo stories, podcasts, and so on and so forth. So a big part of our team is essentially designers and artists, but an equally big part is also researchers, writers, and so on. And finally, the third part of what we do is crafting experiences. And this is essentially trying to take these stories and then trying to create something that could be immersive, that could be experiential, that could be communicating important messages about science to everyday people, and so on and so forth. And for this, we've done everything from making board games to making large carnivals, as well as workshops, residencies, and so on and so forth. From the more boring point of view, like what human-centered design might be looked at, or HCD for short, if you ever come across the term HCD, from a more like bookish innovation mandate kind of a thing, then it's really about just essentially understanding people, empathizing with them, defining problems, defining like ideas and frameworks, ideating, prototyping, and testing, and kind of doing that as many times as it takes to get something right. And that's essentially the spirit of HCD. So under the hood of the terminology, all it means is really just going in with an earnest attitude of making certain situations better, and doing what it takes through the process of failure to get to something that works for everybody involved, right? So, and why storytelling? I think in a nutshell, stories have the power to bring people together. Stories also have the power to display complexities of human experience. Stories have the power to talk to you about the future. They have the power to help you resolve the past. And they also have the power to go across the country and to go across the world even, and to go cross culturally, so to speak, in terms of their message. And what I wanted to now share with you in the next, I'm just going to breeze through a few examples and then let Deepti and Saket take over. Was just, again, in the context of a small workshop like this, just really to just give you 10 or 15 really quick examples of the wide variety of work that one could do as a creator. I'm a designer myself. I studied at NIFT. I studied fashion. I was a toy designer after that, designing children's products. And then I started Quicksand, and I've since then been a researcher. I've done some illustration work. I do motion graphics and so on and so forth. I make video games. So just from that point of view of being a creator, and part of what I'm going to share with you is just going to touch on a few insights for creators when you work on projects in health, and let's say largely in the domain of social impact. So this project over here is a very simple project. It's a project to design like visual pamphlets and comic material to help initiate a national event called National Deworming Day. And this is actually one of the largest events of its kind. It happens across schools all over India. And this material, while it looks really simple, is actually meant to be very simple, but it has to be passed on between many layers of government to millions of people, and kind of help create this one large event. So it's kind of an interesting example of something quite simple which could actually have a pretty big impact in terms of its numbers and so on. This project here shows snippets of a comic that we worked on with Sangath, which is the organization Patty works with, and the rest of the team. And Sangath is also our studio's like a partner in mental health, and we try to partner them in through design and art and so on and so forth. And we've done a wide variety of projects over the years, Mela being one of them. And this is a comic which accompanies kind of material around problem solving, which has been introduced in schools in Goa and Delhi as part of a larger research project. This is a project that's looking at the issue of female contraception, which is again a topic that's actually, while highly important and obviously a topic that's in the news right now for various reasons, is also a topic that, funnily enough, is actually one of the more poorly researched topics in contraception. And we were commissioned by FHI 360 some years back, which is an organization based around the world, and also does work in Africa in health. We were commissioned to meet women in Kenya and in India and speak to them about their notions of contraception, meet women of different age groups and understand where they are in life, in relationships, in marriage, and through that try to understand and create ideas for women users of contraception products. And then this material was taken to scientists from around the world who work specifically on that topic. And the book, for example, that you see on the top, this is part of a larger, like a 40-50 page book, which talks about the various insights that we learned about women that we met. And this material is then used by scientists to think about new innovations in female contraception. So on the bottom right, the image that you see is from a live sketching exercise during an innovation workshop. And this was looking at science innovations that might one day make contraceptions as wearables. And that technology almost exists right now. So these were some ideas that came in terms of the cultural significance of objects that might be adopted by women in certain countries if the science works and so on. So just to give you a quick idea of that one, this project on screen right now is a project in the context of urban sanitation. It's a project that we worked with for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the government of Odisha. And this was looking at what might be new avenues for innovation in sanitation in slums. As you know, there's a huge paucity of space and resources. So this project was trying to understand how architects, urban planners, health scientists, and social scientists could work together to develop a sustainable model for urban sanitation. This project is called the Potty Project, and it's actually, there's a website still on, which has a resource base that some of you might refer to if you want for your work. Another project I wanted to share here is a project called the Financial Capability Toolkit. So this project's about finance in a home, and what you see on the right is a board game that is actually a 6 feet by 6 feet screen printed textile, like a fabric board game for the floors of a self-help group in Andhra Pradesh. And the idea is that when women get together in a self-help group, this is one of the activities that they might do and go through this game of financial life. It essentially helps women help and plan their finances across a whole life cycle of 40, 50 years, which takes them through several milestones in their life, ranging from agricultural catastrophes due to climate change to the demise of a loved one and so on and so forth. So it kind of like covers several aspects of health through this game, but it's also an interesting example of how one could work with game designers, illustrators, as well as like social scientists, economic modelers, and try to create something that could be used finally in a local language, simple setting, along with certain tools that you see on the left, which are used by the facilitators who work in NGOs and so on. I hope I'm not going too fast, but hopefully this just gives you a good snippet and kind of the, I think I wanted to impress on the fact that as creators, part of what one should imagine, I mean, often when, before we started working in mental health as a studio, I personally definitely had the impression as a creator that it's quite hard to figure out how to work with, like, say, the health profession. It's quite complicated at times, and it feels like one might need a whole lot of like different kinds of things happening to be able to be in a position where you can work on projects like this. But the fact is that everybody has a role in an interdisciplinary project, and whether you're a creator who's very young, like for example, these illustrations that you see on screen were made by, if I'm not mistaken, an artist who was still at design school, still studying, or just graduated, maybe 2021 or 19, and they worked with our team to develop these illustrations. Several of the illustrations you see, obviously, in this entire presentation are made by like 10 and more than maybe 20, 30 artists across this page, and many of them are actually very young creators coming from a wide variety of disciplines. And it's important to understand that that often you're part of a larger system of like 4, 5, 6 entities, and as long as you can think about what you can do best, it's most probably quite easy to shake your hands with other people and figure out how to work. So this project that you see in front is actually a project we did with the Wellcome Trust. Sangath was also one of our partners in this, and this was an interesting project that was looking at the question of how do you bring young people in India to participate in mental health research. So we made personas, we did a lot of research across several cities, we met like counselors, we met like NGOs, and then we came up with 4 small reports that can help anyone who's working in the field of mental health to understand young people in India and how to work with them for research. Some of the other avenues that we've been exploring for healthcare and health-related work is obviously around mental health. And what you see on screen here is part and screens from work in process on a video game that we've been working with Sangath on, which is a game that looks at teaching young adults in India about problem solving, and looks at how problem solving in itself could be a way to help alleviate your mental health, and also give you the tools to sustainably tackle some of your own issues using the technique of problem solving. And this is a game that's currently also most probably entering a clinical trial very soon, and it also accompanies itself with the research paper and so on. And it's also an interesting example again of how you need to work with various kinds of artists, not just like artists who are illustrators, but also 3D artists, texture artists, game designers, sound designers, musicians, voiceover artists, and so on. So there's obviously, as the project becomes more complex and gets into this interactive space, the space for very different kinds of creators to work on the same project becomes quite activated itself. And then I just wanted to share, just to conclude, a few kind of ideas from slightly loosely, I mean, again, just to kind of think about health in a slightly open manner. These are examples of 2 comics, 2 of 5 comics that we made on the city of Visakhapatnam in the future. And one of the stories here was around water, and kind of looks into how the health of water is monitored using technology in a smart city. And it's kind of an interesting manner of like also taking citizen feedback. So these were like basically large size comics that came on full size pages of a newspaper, along with an SMS poll and so on and so forth. I'm going to skip a few of these examples in the interest of time, but just to give you an idea that, you know, we've just kind of looking at health in the context of the humanitarian sector. These are screens from a project we did to understand how technology could be used inside a refugee camp and how mobile phones can be activated for various concerns, including healthcare. We've also been working a lot on food, and just kind of to help you understand, again, when you think of health, to think of also other things like food. So this is a project that colleagues of mine have been working on, looking at food futures, and looking at obviously the connection of food and health and farming, and looking at the connection between like sustainable farming and public health, and also looking at how technology in the future could be used to address some of these issues. I wanted to do one short deep dive into a project that could be a fun one to just look at, which again helps you understand health in a very different manner. So this is a project called Trick or Treat. This was supported by the Wellcome Trust and part of a larger project called Medicine Corner, which happened a few years back in India. And this is a project that's looking at the informal healthcare sector broadly, as well as the traditional systems of medicine, everything but hospitals and degree doctors. And for this project, I actually personally, as well as a couple of other people, traveled to many cities around India, documenting people, everyone from 5th generation Ayurvedic doctors to people who were purporting fairly dubious claims around healthcare and tonics, sex doctor, a street dentist, and so on. And we basically, with them, we worked to develop material that could, in a way, show the paradoxes and the contradictions that lie in their life in some ways, because at the end of the day, for a lot of you who might already know this maybe, but in many ways, the informal healthcare sector, which are people like this, or actually accounts for a very, very large chunk and an important chunk of healthcare services, regardless of how poor one might think their services are. So there is a kind of a paradox and a pathos about this, which we were trying to bring through in this project. And it also ended up being on the bottom right, a small traveling museum in which there were comics, such as these 3 kind of like pages are from, it's actually a comic we're still working on. It's a 100-page comic. It's about maybe, I don't know, 5-6 years since we've been doing it slowly. We also worked on a really interesting poster, which is composed of, it's like a Where's Waldo kind of a thing, where you have to spot like many different things happening. And this is inspired by the streets of Old Delhi, where a lot of this research happened, and trying to project it into the future, where we're showing how various informal healthcare services like the massage wala or wali in like parks and even in Old Delhi, that you find 2 people like on the bottom right are kind of the future of a sex specialist who's come out on the streets and has a whole bunch of like fun contraptions to engage with people and suck them into his kind of like spiel, as well as the future of an optician that we met on the street on the scooter with another Chashme sign. And this is again looking at the future of an optician with a whole lot of like tech devices embedded into scooter and so on and so forth. I'm going to stop here and I had one more thing planned, but maybe it'll just be too much. And now we're just going to maybe move to Saket and Deepti and maybe do a deep dive into mental health. But before that, I'm also happy to maybe see if there are any questions in the chat, or if there's anyone else from maybe Patty or Sweta, if you have any questions or comments that you feel I should address, then I can do that before we move on. Hopefully that was interesting and not super paced.
Thanks, Avinash. No questions yet. So for those of you on Zoom, you can use the Q&A feature. If you do have a question, we'll just pop it in there and we'll be answering those then. But happy for Deepthi and Saket to take over, and we can keep the questions to the end then.
Cool. All right, over to you, Deepthi, Saket.
Thank you. I hope you can see our screen.
Yes.
Cool. Great. Hi, I'm Deepthi, and this is Saket. And we're both animators and illustrators, and we work at Quicksand. Wait, why isn't this working? Yes, we wanted to talk to you about our process when working on this project called Mela, which is basically a mental health museum online which we created with, in partnership with Sangath. And it relied heavily on storytelling as well as resources. So like there were several things which led up to the way Mela is right now. For example, there were some artist residencies where we invited several experts and artists to collaborate and create mental health solutions. We did a lot of field research where we spoke to people in various parts of the country about their perceptions of mental health, and tried to also gather stories of lived experience. And we also tried to prototype some of our early work at the Goa Open Arts Festival in 2019 before the pandemic. And then the pandemic happened. So Mela was initially supposed to be a physical museum of mental health where there were several experiences designed for people. But with the pandemic, we moved to a digital first museum, which perhaps was great because it is definitely now able to reach a wider number of people. And yeah, so I will talk to you about, so there were two different streams of content for at Mela. We will touch upon those, and then we will do a deep dive into what else creating content which centers around mental health look like. So the first kind of content we created was the psychoeducational content, which was intended to be a resource. For these, we created several illustrated handouts as well as some animated content, which was designed to provide some very basic information about mental health. And all of this information was extremely action-oriented. Now, as creators, it becomes really important that we're collaborating with people who are well-informed, who are experts in the subject. So we make sure that whatever we are presenting is super accurate and designed and curated in a very well-informed manner. I will be quickly taking you through the kind of design process we followed. So like I said before, we were working very closely with experts who helped us create what is it that we want to see. And from there, we try to represent it in a inclusive manner. And we try to make our characters relatable. We try to make, so when dealing with the subject of mental health, lots of times we have content which is extremely sensitive. So as creators, it becomes really important to think about how is it that we want to represent this information. An approach we took, for example, was using visual metaphors, which helped us capture the feeling of what of the experience without having potentially triggering images or being too explicit. So, for example, over here we were creating stuff around anxiety for the anxiety handout. Then we would have discussions with experts to check in with them about if the representation is okay or not. And that would eventually translate into the more finished handouts. You can check all of these out on the Mela website. We also worked on several animated videos. And I guess like important pointers over here would be to think about how accessible is the work you're creating. Which means multiple things. Like, for example, the work for Mela was translated into multiple languages. it also means that there was audio content available or video content available, which automatically makes sure that different audience can reach out to it. Also, keeping in mind how simple or complex we are making it, remembering who our end users are, who our audience is, and how we can make the information as easy to understand as possible for them. Something like we were extremely lucky to be able to partner with Sangath as our content partners, to where we had psychologists writing the content we were illustrating. But often we ran into the problem of giving mental health information which we might not be 100% sure of. So I guess like that's something we can be wary of as creatives. We should not say what we don't know. Representation matters. So the kind of characters we draw, the kind of art we create, that like we try to be as inclusive as possible of different gender expressions, of people from different regions, etc. And just representation is an important thing in the art to create. And like I said before, a tool which we used was abstract and metaphor, abstraction and visual metaphors to help depict information which might otherwise be sensitive or potentially visually triggering. That being said, I wanted to add on to the second point. I guess like this particular chunk of content was created to be consumed as a resource, where I guess the story part of Mela bridge that gap, because sometimes lived experience is an incredibly powerful tool. So I guess like if you're in the position where you might not be able to collaborate with mental health professionals in creating the content, your lived experience is still an extremely important resource, and then it becomes acting in peace. And Saket will be taking you through our process of working on some stories in Mela.
So like DP was saying, stories are the second part of this museum, and they give insight into lived experiences of 10 different people who we interviewed and captured, illustrated, and wrote their stories on Mela. It just gives a more diverse cross section than you would normally find, and it also, Mela has always been geared around this feeling of hope, and all of these stories are in a way hopeful stories where people describe, okay, this is what I was dealing with, but here is how I cope with this situation that I'm in, and here is how I do. So that was an important part when we were making these stories. So this is just a grab from the website. You can go and see go and read the stories over there, but these were the stories that we had we have and we worked on. So right now, I'm going to focus on our process. Deepthi and I made this story together. There's a first story we made about this person called Saddam. And yeah, I'm just going to take you through the creative process of this. We were working with Patty's sister, Faith, who helped us out with the writing portion. Yeah, right, scripting, research, and interviews and stuff like that. So yeah, this is some of the final pages of what the format looked like. The story was presented in a horizontally scrolling format. It was around 30 pages long. Again, some more pages from the story. Yeah, and another important consideration while doing stuff on Mela was that it was a co-creation process, meaning that the contributors themselves were as involved with the storytelling process as we were. We would constantly go back to them and seek out their feedback. There were extensive interviews conducted with them, and there was a lot of back and forth where they had a say in what what the story would look like. So this was our first point of contact with the contributors, where we made a small comic and informally, very informally introduced ourselves and introduced what our process would be. This was after, right. There were quite intense interviews conducted by Sangath's team and Faith with the contributors. And after we went through those interviews with Faith, we kind of structured the story and moved it around. This is a web thing called Miro, where it allows you to put virtual post-its. So we structured the story in broad strokes and then events of the story, just to get this structure down. And this was the process we followed for the scripting and the thumbnailing, where the visual descriptions and the narrative was written in by Faith, and we did the thumbnails on the left. This also we had to do like 2-3 drafts of this, where we kind of took Sadam through the drafts, and he had some things that we did not do particularly well. For example, this, right? Sadam is from Manipur, and it's a state of unrest. And we were not sure how to represent that, but Sadam clarified some stuff for us. And this is again context, right? We didn't know what Sadam's context is. We didn't know what the people in Manipur were going through. So we did some more visual research, we did some more reading up. Sadam helped us out. And after, these are some of the references we took. And after that, this is the third draft of the storyboard. This is the thumbnail of the same thing and the final page. This is the Faith and the team with Sadam. Sorry. Packing with Sadam. And basically this was our character design and viz dev part of the comic, where we made some different styles and character designs for Sadam, and some, again, final styles. What the comic would look like, where the one on the left is the thumbnail, the middle one is our proposed type frame, and the one on the right is what the final comic actually looked like. So it took us a while to figure out the colors. Even this is the first frame of the comic. The one on the left is our first proposed colors, and the one on the right are the final colors. So it's an iterative process. You kind of take and look at things and then change things if things need to be changed.
So I wanted to give some pointers with creating stories. So over here, we were telling somebody else's mental health story. So it becomes very important as creators to remember, this is not my voice, this is somebody else's voice, and I am merely an instrument to bring it to life. Again, like mentioned in the psychoed content, we were dealing with extremely sensitive subject matter. So I will go back to some of these images. For example, the one in the middle is a representation of substance abuse without being too graphically explicit or potentially triggering. So we were constantly making those choices, and I will share some other stories with you which were created by multiple creators, and they use similar tools to tell these stories. So again, all of them were very much informed by visual research. They were the contributor stories, and we were present as people who could draw and could help them tell their story. So this was a story Saksham worked on for Namrata, and an interesting tool they used was diary entries, because Namrata journaled a lot as a coping mechanism. So that was an interesting tool. This is Kehkashan's story, which Gaurav created. We had Debangshu Maulik come on board to represent Pavel's story. Pavel identifies as non-binary, and so their representation was, again, like they use several visual devices to represent what what their experience as a non-binary person looked like. This is Vidushi's story, which Ekta created. So you can like the example on the left, for example, shows how we tried to capture visually the feeling of isolation. And I guess like something we try to do throughout all these stories were ask ourselves, what does this feel like and how can we best represent that visually? I'm sorry, my cat is playing with the light. Yeah, and this is Monica's story, which I worked on, and a visual device I tried to use for this was personifying Monica's pain and negative emotions as a separate character. And through the course of the story, how Monica interacts with her pain changes from trying to escape it to a place where she was able to have a conversation with her feelings and like sit with her thoughts. So I guess like there's a whole bunch of visual devices which you as creators can look into. These are some things which worked for us, but I'm sure all of you will, as you start the process of figuring out what works best for what story, discover and find out. But like Mela was a project which was centered on the lived experiences of these 10 people. But there is definitely storytelling around mental health, which can be beyond that format. So I have included some examples here. This is a comic I had created about anger, which was based on my own personal experience. So a big change from Mela, where I was working very consciously in a very research informed manner to tell somebody else's mental health story. This one was the process was a lot more self-reflective. And I could represent myself any way I wanted because this is me. But I guess like some questions you can ask yourself is, what is your story? What is it that you want to say? Who is the story for? Is the story a reflective process? Are you designing the story for a particular audience? Something which helps with mental health stories is focusing on the feelings. So how did you feel? What was your process of self-reflection and growth? And using all of this as some starting points helped. With this comic, for example, I had a lot of self-reflection about how I feel about anger happened before I actually went on to make the final comic. And these are some panels from it, which talk about me moving from a space of looking at anger as an evil, ugly thing to a place where I was like, okay, anger is informing me about needs which are being not met, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I can communicate it in multiple ways and I can deal with it in positive ways. So anger is not so bad. Apart from that, I wanted to share some other examples of artists who create content around mental health, which I really like. For example, this is Darren Schuler. This was designed for children, but I think it's really, really important because this is like step one of introspection, of drawing your own feelings, which is great. Mental health content can look like so many different things. So this is Pleasure Paradox and Tara Booth, who creates a lot of content around substance abuse, anxiety, and addiction. You can collage, you can create self-portraits, you can draw what your safe space looks like, you can draw what good days and bad days look like. And I've just tried to curate a bunch of different content, which I like. And I guess this could lead us to the activity part of the thing, which is, it would be really great if you could think about what your own mental health story is. And hopefully like our process has given you some starting points and tools which you can use to tell that mental health story. And it would be really great if you could share that with us on itsokaytotalk.in, or if you haven't shared it on Instagram, you can tag It's Okay to Talk and we can take a look at it. Please let me know if there are any questions.
Deepti, there is a question. Thank you, Deepti Saket. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to read out a question in the chat, which is from Sunalini, which is that as creators who work on mental health, are you in touch with other creators who also work in the space? So you share your experiences and knowledge.
Definitely. And that's something which is a little difficult for the pandemic, but we constantly try to bounce off our ideas. So for example, when we were working on the Southern story, we were working very closely with Avi and also Kapil. Like you saw, like there was a different pool of creators. So Ekta, who created the stories, is also a friend. So we would often like discuss internally what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think this goes beyond just in the context of mental health, because we know each other from college. Like we've known each other for 4-5 years, and when we were doing our final graduation projects, we were also constantly bouncing ideas off of each other. It's now it's more or less baked into us as a process to I guess get feedback. That's
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add to that, was it in the collaborations that we do with Sangath as well as in their own work, a lot of this kind of collaboration with artists and creators and sharing of what could happen with the creator community at large happens mainly through projects like Mann Mela. So there are several projects where Sangath tries to essentially create a platform for creators and artists to work together, as well as, for example, there's a new youth public engagement program that Sangath and us are also collaborating on with the Center for Mental Health Law and Policy, which is looking at mitigating youth suicide in India by the creation of a platform that brings people together and also brings artists and creators together. And often for any of these projects, we put out open calls. That is also a great place to look for. So the It's Okay to Talk Instagram page, for example, is the place to look for open calls that often happen through the year. And finally, I think another way in which we like to work together at Quicksand as well as in Sangath is really to use the process of workshops, of in-person. Of course, in-person interaction seems like a faraway dream right now, but when things open up, of course, the idea that we can bring people together in a physical setting. Sometimes, for example, Sangath and us, we've brought together let's say about 20 to 25 creators to a place like Delhi in a residential campus for 3 to 4 days of learning from each other, of capacity building, of interactions and collaborations, of bringing scientists and artists together, and so on. So that's some of the ways in which we try to have a larger footprint in the creative community, and also we invite, as Quicksand and as Sangath, obviously, we invite as many creators as possible to work on this very urgent and important topic. Any other questions? Okay, here we go. I'm just going to read that out, Saket, Deepti. So one question from Srishti Chand is that if an individual wants to share their mental health story with the world, how can they collaborate with you or other creators working for mental health? Deepti, you want to reiterate what you said at the end of the presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good first step is to tell your own story, and platforms such as It's Okay to Talk are great places to do that. Like Patty said, you can create a blog where, again, it can look like anything. It could be a written story. You could create videos. There are other media pieces. You can art doesn't necessarily like need you to draw. For example, collaging is something I really enjoy. Apart from that, I think Mela has a section where you can submit your own stories. And I think Patty or Shweta would be better people to talk about that.
Hi, Shashi. Yeah, I think Deepti's covered it, but I mean, if you do have a story that you wanted to share, I mean, please do get in touch. The idea is also to think through with you how you would like to share the story and to sort of work from there. So we tend to not be very prescriptive in what we will suggest, but it's always good to see what the person who wants to share or how they would like to share it, and we sort of work with them to craft the story and the platform to share it on. And as you will see, I think we don't really highlight social media. Social media tends to be one of the sharing platforms. What we prefer to do is first work out the kind of story you want to tell and then think through where all and how we would like to share it. Hopefully that answers your question, but we're happy to take this individually as well if you or someone you know would like to share their experience.
Cool. And thanks to whoever's posting compliments.
I
So
just
the-
wanted to check, Avinash, Sakiti, was there more in your presentation, or we can just check if there are more questions from anyone in the group?
yeah, we can check if there are questions. We have, I mean, thanks, Faith. We have, I mean, I had some extra slides in there which I can share with, but I think we did a good job of like covering stuff. But maybe I can just ask like Sakit, Deepti to a couple of questions, maybe if that's, I can grill them a little bit. I haven't spoken to them in a while. So I think what is interesting as a creator, I think, is obviously like I think specifically around mental health, as both of you know, as everyone here also knows, mental health is such a widely spoken about topic. And if you look at before the pandemic, obviously it was always an important topic to talk about, but the pandemic has obviously led to a lot, like exponentially more importance being given to in the public realm, as well as individuals speaking out on social media, so on and so forth. So my question was, how do you feel about that as creators? Do you, because you guys started work on this project before the pandemic, and then I'm sure you've seen and you've done the bulk of this project during the pandemic. How do you feel the pandemic has affected mental health and in the creator community, and how people feel about it?
I think I've always valued talking about mental health, and even before all of this, even before joining Quicksand, when I was a third year design student, my mental health wasn't in a great place, and creating art around it was just one of the things I did to express myself and therefore cope with it. And when I was sharing those stories, it was cathartic because multiple other people reached out to me, and it just made me feel a little less alone. But definitely, like through the pandemic, I've seen the number of people struggling with mental health increase. I think talking about your story or just like talking about your experience is really helpful because one, it lets other people know that they're not alone, and two, it makes you feel less alone because there are other people who are going through this. I've had multiple conversations with my friends where I'm like, okay, I feel like this, and they're like, I also feel like this, which makes me feel like, okay, I mean, we're all going through something together. And yeah, I think also like the process of storytelling can be incredibly self-reflective, which can provide you the space to think about how is it that you deal with things. But that's of course when you like telling your own story. I learned a lot working on Mela with other people's stories as well, because it's always great to see. And you know, like most of the stories on Mela tell you that things were really difficult, and it's not that there is like a switch you can switch on and then things are amazing. But there are things you can do, you can reach out for help, and there are things which you can do which can help you cope with it better. Or just equip you with tools to, you know, handle a situation thrown at you so you don't feel as lost as you did before. Therapy for all. There are resources available. There is help available. So I guess, yeah.
Thank you. Extremely valuable advice. Sakit, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm not going to be as helpful as Deepti. I've had a very bad relationship with social media, and I have just completely taken myself out of the picture. But like the pandemic, I was watching Kiki's Delivery Service, a beautiful film by Jimmy, and it talks about artist burnout through this character of this little witch, and it was a very cathartic experience, I would say, because like that was something I was going through, and it was presented in such a charming and charming way, which didn't put the burnout situation, it didn't put it down. So it felt as though I was being heard, and it felt warm inside while watching it.
Thank you for sharing. Great thoughts. I also just wanted to compliment you, both of you, before I forget, on the amazing work that you've put in here, as well as obviously all your our other colleagues, Ekta, Gaurav, as well as the various collaborators who worked on Mann Mela with us. I had a question before we maybe sign off, which was that maybe both of you can answer it separately as well, which is like, what have you found most challenging in your work in Mann Mela or in general, just working in this kind of a messy manner at some level? I mean, and when I say messy, I don't mean that this project, I mean, all projects are messy at the end of the day, but I think compared to the more, let's say, what you would be doing as animators in an animation studio versus this extra complexity of what a project like this involves, which under the garb of human-centered design hides a lot of the messiness, for example, and makes it look cool. What do you feel as just as pure play animators and artists yourself in your own right? What has been challenging?
I think the process which I follow when I am talking about my own experiences of creating art, which is informed by my own personal experiences, very, very different from my process in a project like this, which is challenging, but also really, really great, because it makes me think about ideas which I probably wouldn't have on my own. I guess it can be daunting when you have somebody else's story with you, because you want to make sure that it's their voice which shines. You are doing justice to their experience, and it is another person, right? And this is something really, they're making themselves really vulnerable to you. And doing justice to that can be daunting. I am really, really grateful that they trusted us with their stories, that they were so patient with us with their questions. I think just that was really challenging, making sure that I am handling somebody else's life experience in the most sensitive, respectful way possible, and telling their story in a way they want their story to be told, and not how I would want to tell a story.
If I'm being completely honest, I think the hardest bit was I have not been in the best mental state myself, and yeah, I don't think I could have done some of the stories just plain and simple, that they were just too yeah. So I did what I could. Thankfully, those were not, they didn't affect me personally as much as some of the others did. But yeah, that was the hardest bit.
Yeah, like how to protect our own mental health as creators when handling content like this is definitely a challenge.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's a really important aspect of this work, that possibly people who just look at the comics might not necessarily understand that nuance. And I think, yeah, I congratulate you for handling that balance, and I think you've done an amazing job with it. As of the feedback, and just one on a lighter note, just to end the session, what is for each one of you? Is there a piece of feedback that you got that really made you smile and feel proud of yourself? Anything that sticks out, or in general, were there any reactions that made you feel like it was this kind of hard journey was worth it?
I think when I was working with Monica's story and just working with Monica, we were vibing, and at one point she reached out to me separately and she was like, I want to make comics. And I was just like, yes. So that was nice. I mean, it was really nice to like get to know. Yeah, and I think towards the end, like the whole process took several months. But when the story came out and luckily all of our contributors liked what we did, it was really nice to see that they liked what we did. Yeah.
It was nice talking to Salon, and I think he was the only one that I really talked with post.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice to hear that. I mean, that's really interesting to hear from you around the accolades from the individual that you created with. I think that's a really important aspect as well, to think about these stories which actually happen over 8 months with just you and one person, and you're trying to create this special world, and finally it's the, in some ways it's the experience of that one person that means so much at the end of it. So that's great to hear. Thank you for sharing. That's it from us. Any other questions, of course, feel free to mail us or reach out to Sangath. And thanks to Sangath for having us on this amazing project.
Thanks, Avinash, and thanks, Deepthi and Saket, also for talking about what your own experience was like. I think that's been really valuable to hear more about. Yeah, thanks, guys. Feel free to switch off your video if you're sticking around. We're just going to give everyone a 2-minute breather before we jump into the next session. And it'll be great if those of you who are still on the attendees, if you could just fill in the poll that has popped up. It'll take you just maybe 10 seconds to fill it in. Your feedback is super helpful, so we really appreciate it if you can fill that in. We're going to be starting with our next session in just a couple of minutes, and we'll introduce our speaker and host to you in just a second. Hi, everyone, and thanks very much for those of you who stuck it out the entire day. Big ups to you guys. I'm very happy to introduce our next host. We have a short session now, 30 minutes, on a guided mindfulness activity. Thanks, Eleanor, for joining us. I'm just going to very quickly introduce Eleanor and give you a sense of what to expect in the next 30 minutes. Eleanor worked with us over the past 2 years on creating the Mann Mela project and museum. And aside from her work on this project, Eleanor is a clinical psychologist who specializes in mental health difficulties, particularly those that arise from abuse or trauma. And her work is focused on women, refugees, and vulnerable groups such as adolescents, young people, gangs, or other ethnic minorities. Over this next half an hour, she's going to be telling us a little bit more about why mindfulness can be helpful, take us through an activity to give us a sense of what what mindfulness looks like, and is going to make a few suggestions for things we can do to practice on our own or tools that we can use. And we will have a little bit of time at the end for some questions that she will take for us. So thanks again, Eleanor. Handing over to you. If you need to share your screen, you should be able to do that as well.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you've been having an interesting and thought-provoking day. It seems like a great session that I just caught the end of. So yeah, as Patty said, I'm a clinical psychologist and also have been sort of practicing mindfulness for quite a long time, both for personal and professional reasons. And so I'm a big advocate of the practice to help with everyone's well-being, everyone's ability to think and take time for themselves. I think it can be a really, really helpful skill to develop. So that's why I'm here talking about it. But before I kind of get into telling you, speaking a lot about mindfulness, I just wanted to start with a really, really brief taster. Some of you may already know a lot about meditation and mindfulness from other places, so apologies if this is going to seem quite basic, but for those of you who don't, I think it's important to start with small ways of getting into it, because it can seem, I think, otherwise a little bit daunting. So I can't see any of you, so I'm going to hope that this feels all right to follow along. I'm just, so you know, I'm going to keep my eyes open as I talk you through this. Normally when I practice, I keep my eyes shut, but given that I can't see any of you, I'm going to keep my eyes open so I can make sure that I'm keeping to time. So to start with, I just like you all to sit up wherever you are in your chair, on the floor, sort of get into a sort of relaxed but alert kind of posture. So ideally, if you're in a chair, 2 feet on the floor, back straight, kind of not slouched, sitting kind of reasonably upright, but soft, not sort of tense and holding yourself. So kind of wriggling around however much you might need to and just settling into sitting. And then I'll invite you to close your eyes. If you don't feel comfortable to do that, that's fine, but it's easier, I think, if you do. So closing your eyes and just taking a moment to allow your mind to come in and settle in the body. So just allowing the kind of noise or hubbub or sort of focus to settle down, come in to your body, sitting here now, feeling the weight of your body in the chair or on the floor, your feet perhaps in contact with the floor, your arms resting by your sides. And then focusing down on your breathing, just watching your breath as it comes in and out of the body. So sometimes it's easiest if you watch the breath at the nose as it comes in and out of your nostrils. Other people find it more easy to get in touch with at the belly as it rises and falls. So wherever the breath feels most vivid, most easy to connect with, just connecting for a moment with your breath. Noticing the in-breath, the pause between the breaths, and the out-breath as they come and go in this moment. And what you might find is you notice that there's thoughts, other sensations, other noises or things that are coming into your awareness. That's fine, just noticing that that is there, and gently kind of coming back to the breath, just escorting your attention back. So just focusing on the breathing in and out. Just feeling the whole body here, now, breathing. And again, if the mind wanders or other thoughts or judgments crop up, noticing that, acknowledging that, just gently bringing the mind back to the breath. Okay, and just widening again the scope of your awareness to the whole body, just checking in the sensations in the body, noticing what's there, noticing sensations of touch, noticing how the body is feeling, any areas of tension, tightness. And then when you're ready, just perhaps taking a slightly deeper breath in and out, and opening your eyes and coming back to the room. Okay, so hopefully everyone is back from that practice. So that was just a really brief breathing space. And partly I kind of wanted to do that so that I'm not just talking at you about mindfulness, but also, as Patty said, I think what's really important about trying to integrate any sort of mindfulness into your day is finding ways to make it accessible and easy to use. And I find those moments of just checking in actually might be as useful to me as, you know, a 45-minute sitting and meditating session. So it doesn't have to be a long, arduous practice. It can be done in really bite-sized chunks. So let's talk then a little bit about what that was and why mindfulness. So mindfulness is the act of paying attention moment by moment in an open, curious, non-judgmental way to our internal and external experience. It's just about being present with whatever is here for us. So it's how most people go about their day-to-day lives is that we experience the outside world and ourselves, our internal world, through a kind of filter of all sorts of sort of mental processes, our judgments, our thoughts, our physical sensations. They all act unconsciously to sort of create the world around us, or much of the world around us. So we don't receive the world or our internal selves. What we receive is through this filter of our thoughts, our judgments, our kind of narrative about ourselves, about other people, about the world. So mindfulness is a really, really useful tool to try to help us notice that and be able to simply take a step back, to be able to try to sort of dispassionately view our experience. As I say, whether that is something outside in the world or whether that's something internal to us. So there's nothing kind of that complex or magical about what mindfulness is. It's very simply that, just being present. But that doesn't mean to say that it is easy. So what probably many of you noticed during that little taster is just how busy the mind is, just going, pulling you in all sorts of directions, thinking about the past, worrying about the future, kind of mulling over what you're doing right now. Am I doing it right? Am I supposed to feel this? Oh, that feels funny. All of this kind of noise that our minds naturally produce. So mindfulness gives us a way to try to slow down and focus on that experience and be able to, as I say, sort of view it from a slightly step back place. And what that allows us to do is then decide, make a more proactive decision about how we respond. Because again, most of the time when we're living day-to-day lives, we just react, we just respond to this filter and to the external and internal cues that we're receiving, like that. So mindfulness gives us a tool to be able to take a step back and respond more purposefully. And the other thing I think that's important to say about mindfulness is that we all have this ability already. You already just did it. We all have the ability to pay attention and to be present with our bodily experience, with our internal mental activity, with the world around us, to be in the present, to be fully there. We have this ability. It's just that we often don't have much space to kind of cultivate this approach, this step back approach. So that really is all mindfulness is. Having spoken about what it is, I just want to touch, before we do another sort of longer practice, on a few things that it's not, that I think often get a bit confused. So one thing that it's not is it's not about relaxing. I'm afraid, as nice as that might be, it's not about relaxing. So lots of people say they find mindfulness relaxing, and okay, great, that's really good if you do, but it's not the intention, it's not the purpose of mindfulness. And I think if people go in expecting to feel relaxed and then they don't, then they're like, oh, I must be doing it wrong, or this isn't for me. But actually, as I've said, mindfulness is simply about paying attention to whatever is there. And sometimes what's there, both internally or externally, are sensations, thoughts, experiences that we might not like that much. We might find difficult to sit with. There might be physical pain, there might be distressing thoughts or feelings. And mindfulness is not about trying to get away from those things. It's quite the opposite. It's simply about trying to be present with whatever is there, but from this space of curious, open, dispassionate, non-judgmental observation, right? So that in itself, some people find that process relaxing sometimes, some of the time. But again, it's important not to feel like that's the purpose. I'm going to meditate to feel relaxed, because actually it's about being present with whatever is there, working with whatever is there. And really that it's fostering that acceptance of some of the more difficult parts of our experience. That is one of the most valuable things that mindfulness can offer to us. It's also not about concentrating or having a completely empty mind. So again, often people say, oh, well, my mind was just too busy. I was doing it wrong. That's not the case. Minds produce thoughts, judgments, sort of criticisms, observations, memories, future thoughts. Or that is what the mind does. It generates that all the time. We're not trying to get rid of that or tell the mind off for doing what it does. What we're simply trying to do is practice being able to notice that that's what our mind does. That every 2 seconds, my mind is somewhere else when I was sort of trying to set the intention of noticing the breath, right? So I just go, oh, okay, there I am again, thinking about that thing that is, on my mind or bothering me, or that I really want to do later on. Okay. Thanks, mind, for taking me over there. Just noticing that and bringing my attention back. Okay, so it's that process that is mindfulness. It's not the perfectly calm, clear mind with just peace and zen, unfortunately. And the sort of final little thing I will say before we get into a proper practice is you don't have to meditate to be mindful. So most people find that some sort of formal, what we call formal meditation practice, is helpful for cultivating the skill. Sitting in a nice quiet space where you're not going to be disturbed and setting aside a decent chunk of time definitely sort of is more conducive to practicing. But you don't have to do it like that. And I think it's really important, and we'll talk a bit more at the end perhaps about everyday ways of integrating this process of attention. You can do it anywhere and everywhere, in snippets or in longer chunks. And if formal practice isn't for you, it doesn't mean that mindfulness isn't for you. Okay, so I'll stop waffling and we will do a body scan practice. So again, just as I've been saying, that the idea of this practice is we're just going to come into the body, really working to just pay attention to what is there. Now, very common things that come up are discomfort, you know, itching, it's too hot, it's too cold, oh, my back aches. Okay, that's part of the process. We're not trying to change what is there. We're not necessarily trying to even soften or relax that. I mean, there might be a little bit of that you find through breathing into your body. But again, that's not the intention. All we're trying to do is notice, dispassionately open with curiosity. Okay. So that being said, assume your sort of alert position, sitting comfortably but sort of upright, however you found good before, maybe shifting from before if it didn't work for you. And again, just taking a moment to begin with to just settle in, sort of do any wriggling you might need to do. And then when you're ready, just closing your eyes. And allowing the mind again to just come into the body. Just sort of allowing the mind to settle, just any other thoughts or things that are going on, just seeing if you can let them sort of dissolve away into the background and just coming into the body. And again, we're going to start with the breath. So just touching base with the breath at the belly or at the nostrils, coming in and coming out. Just connecting with that in-breath and the out-breath. Noticing the pause between the breaths. Trying to see each breath as a new breath in this moment. And at any time we can come back to the breath as an anchor. Okay, if the mind wanders off, the breath is always there, can always come back. Touch base with the breath to ground us in this moment. So we're going to move our attention now down to your toes, all the way down into your toes, and just noticing any sensations that are there. Really trying to tune in to your big toes, your little toes, your middle toes. Just trying to take a curious interest in what you can feel. There might be tingling, it might be cool, it might be clammy. There might be no sensation that you can register. Just noticing whatever is there. Just being open to that. Just trying to tune in to any sensation. And perhaps feeling the breath come all the way in through the body down to your toes, and then all the way out, back up the body and out through your nose. And going to shift the attention now to your feet, left foot and the right foot. Perhaps noticing sensations of touch with the floor. Perhaps if you're wearing socks or shoes, noticing the sensation of that contact. Noticing temperature. Just being open to whatever is there. And if the mind has wandered or is making judgments about the practice or bringing your mind elsewhere, just noticing that. Gently bringing your focus back to your feet. And now moving up to the lower legs, so below the knee, your calves and your shins. Just noticing any sensations here. Again, allowing the breath to come all the way down through the body, down into the calves, down into the shins, and back up and out through the nose. Moving up into your knees. Now, knees take quite a lot of hard work supporting us and helping us to be active, and they can often be areas where we might feel some discomfort. So just kind of taking a moment to be with them, with whatever sensation is there. Maybe experiencing a little bit of gratitude as well. A little bit of thanks to our knees. Breathing into them and breathing out. And now again, shifting up to our thighs, our lower legs, buttocks. Feeling again, probably sensations of touch, the weight of our body. Noticing any other sensations throughout the upper legs. Again, trying to be just open and curious to whatever is there. Just noticing and allowing yourself to be exactly as you find it. Whatever is there in this moment. So just being open to it. And if the mind wanders again, just noticing that and gently bringing the mind back to focusing on your upper legs. Going to shift up again now to the lower back. Again, this can be perhaps an area that you might feel some difficulties with, some discomfort, some tightness perhaps. Just tuning in to whatever is there. Just noticing any sensations. Breathing in to the lower back and back out. Just allowing the lower back to be fully in your mind. Fully having your attention. And moving now to the belly. And here you can really connect with the breath, feeling the abdomen going up and down with your breathing. Feeling the whole of the belly. Lots of important stuff goes on here. Your digestion, really connected to our physical and mental health. Again, just noticing whatever sensations are here. Breathing into the belly and breathing out. Moving up now into the chest and the upper shoulders. Just noticing any sensations here. Connecting with the breath as it comes into the lungs, feeling the movement of the muscles, the lungs expanding, the diaphragm. Just noticing those sensations of breath. Breathing in and out. Moving to the back of the chest now, and back of the shoulders, shoulder blades. Just noticing, perhaps particularly any tightness here, noticing if we're holding our shoulders up rather than allowing them to be soft down our back. Seeing if you can let go, perhaps, of any tension that you might be holding. Just noticing what's there. Now coming down into our arms and our hands. Noticing any sensations. Perhaps we can feel the sides of our body. Perhaps it's in contact with our legs on the floor, on our lap. Just noticing any sensation, tingling, warm, coolness. Just breathing into the arms and the hands and out. Now shifting our awareness up into the head and the neck. Just feeling any sensations that there might be in the jaw, cheeks, the eye sockets, in the forehead, and in the top of the head. Again, this can be a place that we carry a lot of tension. Just noticing any sensations that are there. Just observing how the head, the neck, top of the head, how they feel right now. Any sensations that are there. Breathing in and out of all of those spaces. And before we finish, I want you to just come back into the full body, just trying to hold the whole of your body in awareness just for a moment. Just checking in with how the body feels right now. Allowing breath to fill up all of the space from tips of your toes right up into your head and out again. And perhaps giving yourself a little bit of praise for spending this time being with yourself, being with your body, being with whatever sensations are there. Thanking yourself for this time. And then having a nice deep breath in and out, and opening your eyes and coming back to the room. So it is exactly 3 o'clock, and I think that's time for the next session. So what would be great, I don't know if people are coming to the session tomorrow, but if you do have any questions, there will be another session tomorrow at, I don't know what time it is in India, so Patty can tell you. I'm calling from the UK. So maybe post them, and then I can sort of do a little Q&A tomorrow instead of taking up more time now. But thanks very much, everyone. I hope that was a useful space for you.
Thanks so much, Eleanor. I'm looking forward to having you again tomorrow. Tomorrow's session is at 5:30 p.m. India time. Great. Thanks, Eleanor. We're just going to move you into the attendees. We'll just give everyone 1 or 2 minutes to come back into the Zoom room. Arunima, do we need to do any setup for Vikram?
No, I think we're good to go.
Great, thanks. Vikram, we'll just cue you in 2 minutes. Great. So as everyone joins in, and thanks to all of you who are also on live stream, I'd just like to welcome our speaker for the plenary this evening, tell you a little bit about Vikram and what you can expect in today's session. Thanks, Vikram, for joining. Vikram Patel is a psychiatrist and a researcher. He is the Pershing Square Professor of Global Health and a Wellcome Trust Principal Research Fellow at Harvard Medical School. His work has focused on the burden of mental health problems, their association with community resources for their prevention and treatment. He is a fellow of the UK's Academy of Medical Sciences and has served on the committee which drafted India's first national mental health policy and the WHO High-Level Independent Commission for Non-Communicable Diseases. Aside from many awards and recognitions that Vikram has received, he was also named in the Time 100 Most Influential People in 2015. He has also been for the Mann Mela project. Welcome, Vikram. We're so glad that you could join for our festival. I invite you to unmute yourself and the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Patty, and thank you to the Mann Mela team for inviting me to speak at this wonderful festival of yours. I'm particularly honored to be speaking on the day of the World Suicide Prevention Day, and so I also want to greet everyone on this important day for this important cause. But before I speak, I wanted to just acknowledge the passing of a very, very important man who really played a transformative role in the mental health landscape of India. You would hear Patty mentioning that I served on the committee that drafted India's first national mental health policy. What I wanted to acknowledge was that the initiative to draft such a policy and the Mental Health Care Act and many of the other reforms that we have seen in India in the last 5 to 10 years were really steered by Keshav Desiraju, one of India's finest civil servants, a person of immense dignity, decency, and intellect, who strongly believed in the power of civil society working as a full and equal partner of government. And today we really mourn his untimely passing a few days ago, and remember his incredibly important contributions to mental health in India. Moving to the topic that I wanted to talk to you about today, which is really about how and why young people's stories are central to changing the narrative around mental health for young people. Given that today is Suicide Prevention Day, I wanted to just remind ourselves why this is such an important topic for young people. Well, quite simply, because suicide is the leading cause of death in young people in India and indeed around the world. In the US, where I'm currently joining you from, suicide is the second leading cause of death in young people, and it is rising. In fact, over the last decade, suicide mortality in the US has risen by nearly 50%. We don't have such good data from India, but I wouldn't be surprised if we might also be seeing, at the least, no improvement in suicide mortality, but at the worst, it might be even a worsening in those rates. So it's a really important problem. And of course, as we know, suicide has very many complex causes. There is never a single factor that leads to suicide. There are typically factors that we see at a societal level. Let's be quite honest. Around the world, including in India, we are seeing increasingly repressive social attitudes that actually constrain the freedoms and lives of young people. For example, in India, the freedom for young people to live and love people of their choice across religion and community and caste. Those sorts of structural forces inevitably pose enormous stressors on the well-being of young people. We also know that there are factors that operate in our neighborhoods, both violence as well as other kinds of factors to do with pollution, low-income neighborhoods where there are a number of other environmental determinants. There are factors to do with the health sector. For example, the complete lack of access to good quality mental health care, particularly for young people, care that is tailored to what young people want, that meets young people where they are, and addresses not only their mental health concerns, but the social factors that almost always coexist with those mental health concerns. So we have to think of actions across all these contexts. We need progressive social policies. We need a health sector that is using task sharing, that is to say, the deployment of frontline workers, including, very importantly, young people themselves who are adequately trained to support other young people with mental health difficulties. We need modification of environments, particularly in schools and other educational institutions that promote mental health. But perhaps most important of all, we need the individual at the very center of all actions for suicide prevention and more generally promoting mental health. After all, what is suicide? At its very heart, it is the loss of hope, the sense that there is nothing left worth living for. And of course, this loss of hope doesn't suddenly appear suddenly. It doesn't occur without any context or history. In fact, there is always a story which leads up to the point at which a young person decides that life is not worth living anymore and acts upon that thought. This story is very unique. It is unique to that very individual's life story, the life story that can include experiences that the person may have had in their earliest years of childhood or during their contemporary experiences as a young person, experiences related to physiological and physical and reproductive health changes that are so important during this phase of life, experiences to do with what's going on in one's social worlds, relationships that people have at home, with family members, neighbors, with people that you are in love with your friends. If you think of this diverse range of experiences, almost every story is exquisitely unique to that individual. And telling this story is so very important, both for the storyteller, the narrator, as well as the listener. When I was thinking about what my remarks for today, I was influenced by a book that I'm actually currently just about finishing. And I wanted to actually quote a few lines from that book. The book is by an author, Tommy Orange, who is a native in the US, and it's called There. By way of context, some of you will know that Native people of North America, and indeed Native people around the world, such as in Australia and many other places which were colonized by the Europeans hundreds of years ago, face perhaps the highest rates of mental health problems and suicide on the planet. And this particularly affects its young people. It is impossible to really see this very high burden of mental health problems purely through the lens of mental illness affecting individuals. One has to understand this high burden, as this book beautifully does, through the lens of centuries of a genocidal colonial history, which robbed people of their land, their culture, and their dignity. In the book, one of the key characters is a young Native man who is funded to actually have to do a storytelling project, to get young people to tell their stories about what it means to be Native in America. And I wanted to just read out now, directly from the book, something that this protagonist in this story tells those he's trying to interview to tell their stories. And this is what he says. When you hear stories from people like you, you feel less alone. When you feel less alone, and like you have a community of people behind you, alongside you, I believe you can lead a better life. I found this line very powerful, especially the words community of people and the word alongside you. And I'll return to that theme a little later. The power of storytelling is well known. Any one of us who's ever read a story, and I'm not talking only about mental health related stories, any story can appreciate how powerful that is. But within the context of health, and here I want to refer to the wonderful material that's been produced by the Health Foundation, the power of storytelling is immense and for many reasons. Storytelling can help us overcome the challenges of traditional health communications, which often are very pathologizing, reducing all our health experiences to diseases and disorders and diagnoses and medical treatments. As we know, in the mental health sector, most people who are suffering from difficulties with their mental health don't really perceive of their problems as mental disorders that need doctors, drugs, and diagnoses. People are more likely to remember a story than a statistic. Storytelling forges connections among people and between people and ideas. Stories are a critical tool to make information more engaging, more accessible, less stigmatizing, and also more equitable. And this is so important, the word equity, because we know that mental health problems disproportionately affect people in our communities who come from historically disadvantaged or minority groups. And here I'm thinking about a range of different minority groups, including, of course, the sexual minorities. And of course, stories, by highlighting diverse lived experiences and contexts, make these different experiences much more accessible. It makes us relate to, empathize, and understand those different lived experiences. Telling stories can be very powerfully therapeutic, both for the storyteller and the listener. How does it help those who are telling their stories? First of all, let's acknowledge that telling your story about your mental health experience can often be quite a scary experience. Particularly, we must acknowledge we live in a world where talking about mental health is all too rare. And when it does happen, it's often associated with stigma and shame. And so telling a story itself is an act of enormous courage when one tells a very personal, intimate story, the kind of stories that are so central to understanding our mental health. So I want to say that telling stories is therapy in itself, in many different ways. Firstly, you become more aware of and acknowledge how your social world is affecting your mental health and recognize that it's perfectly okay to not be okay. Second, by sharing the burden, you reduce its weight. This is, of course, at the heart of all psychotherapy. Most importantly, it is never a sign of weakness. On the contrary, telling your story reflects your maturity and the comfort you have with your own feelings. I remember this amazing incident where the Prime Minister of Norway, now no matter the fact that it was Norway and this is a country with very different attitudes, still, the Prime Minister of Norway experienced depression. Instead of pretending he had some other illness, he actually went on national TV and spoke to his people and said, I have depression, I need to take a few weeks off until I recover. And in the meantime, my deputy will run the country. Not only were Norwegians deeply impressed and sympathetic to his disclosure, but in the next subsequent national elections, he won a thumping majority. I think this tells you a lot about how the general community appreciates honest and frank and authentic storytelling. Third, engaging others in your stories, as I mentioned, is the most effective strategy to reduce stigma. Fourth, it's of course a creative task, one which stimulates your mind, distracts you from worrying and ruminating thoughts, both of which are very powerful ways to improve and promote your mental health. And finally, reflecting on some aspect of your life can be very meditative. Sometimes it can help you become more forgiving for yourself, which I think is so very important, so you don't hold yourself responsible or blame yourself for things that have happened, but also forgiving for others around you. Above all, telling a story can help bring meaning and insight into what's going on in your life and in your mind. And for those who are listening to the stories, listening will itself offer ways to gain meaning of your own personal struggles in the past, and hopefully gain strength and ideas on how to deal with possible struggles that lie ahead. Let's be honest, struggles are part of life. There's nothing pathological about struggles or indeed stress. It's how we are able to cope with them and harness the resources around us that really matters. Listening to stories gives us an opportunity to learn from other people's experiences, and it can shape, strengthen, or challenge our opinions and values. When a story catches our attention and engages us, we are far more likely to absorb the message and meaning, much more likely than just being presented by dry biomedical facts and figures. But I wanted to say one thing to the listener. Please just listen. Don't try and be a savior. Don't feel pity. Don't pass judgment. Just accompany the person by listening, by validating them, and by being there when they're needed, but not trying to take over. In closing, the theme for World Suicide Prevention Day is creating hope through action. And today, I hope that all of us who have stories to tell will find avenues to share them. And the rest of us will listen with respect and create an environment of hope and inclusion, which in my mind are probably the single most important actions that we as individuals can do to prevent suicide in our communities. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you again to the Mann Mela team for inviting me.
Thank you, Vikram. And thanks for sharing your perspective and the encouragement to talk more openly about what we are experiencing, especially I think this is a very encouraging message for many of the young people who have shared both their art and experiences throughout this day. So I encourage all of you who are still here to please visit the virtual museum. The link is being posted in our chat. I just want to take a couple of minutes to see if anyone has questions. I'll read them out. If you could post them in the Q&A section, or you could just type them directly into the chat. We have one question here, how to tell someone who is sharing their story that we are not in a headspace or a healthy headspace to listen to their story. This is from Ria. Ria, thanks for asking that. I think that's a really good question.
Well, I mean, my sense is, I'm not sure I've really fully understood Ria's question, but my interpretation is that sometimes we're in not the best place to listen to someone else's story. I think if that is what the question was about, as I said, you listen with whatever mind space you have. You do not need to respond to another person's story. I don't ever feel compelled, as I said, just listen. I don't ever feel compelled to have to suddenly say something in response. It's perfectly okay to be silent. In fact, in my mind, that's often the most supportive thing, not being silent and bored, but silent and being attentive. I would never want to pressurize myself with the idea that I have to say something meaningful or deep or profound in response to someone else's story.
Thanks, Vikram. We have another question here. It says, the state of the world can feel really distressing, and we see so much loss of hope. The natural disasters we are surrounded with can also leave us so hopeless. So what is the meaning and purpose of it all? And what do you make of this challenge, especially for the younger generation?
Yeah, you know, I have to say I share that. It's very hard to not be despondent at these times. You know, the pandemic, of course, has brought so many reasons for despondency, but added to that is climate change, and you know, something that, especially for young people today, is a matter of existential anxiety, because it really reflects on the sustainability of the world that they will inherit. There's also the rise of hate in many parts of the world, including in India and the US. There's a pulling back of rights and freedoms that we actually had taken for granted. In the US, for example, they're taking away the right for reproduction rights for women, and that has just happened a few days ago in the state of Texas. So I think you know, it is not at all surprising to be despondent. I would normalize the despondency. Actually, I wouldn't pathologize it. I think there are reasons that we should all be concerned about the sustainability of our planet and the coherence of our society. But instead of letting that despondency overwhelm us and feel that the despondency is the problem, I would actually take this despondency, chuck it onto the side, and make this a cause to actually be more optimistic, to do things, to be stuck in and engaged with activities that can address one or more of these large structural forces. I would be inspired by the movements of young people like climate change. Let's be absolutely honest. If we are seeing a dramatic upsurgence in actions on climate change, it's being driven by young people. So I actually believe that young people are the vanguard of social change. There's a lot that we need to do in India and globally to address these large social factors. And rather than being overwhelmed by despondency, I would see this as an opportunity to find new meaning and purpose in our lives. And I'll tell you one thing, when you do that, the despondency will feel like really something of the past, and you will be driven by inspiration and motivation. And of course, that will also affect your mental health in positive ways.
Thanks, Vikram. The next question is, how do we support friends who lose dear ones to suicide?
Yeah, that's a really tough, extremely tough, question. Having sort of encountered something similar in the recent past, I have to tell you there is no easy or straight way to support a family that's been affected by suicide, a friend who's lost someone due to suicide. The thing about a suicide, unlike any other cause of death, is that it isn't seen as a natural cause of death. It's not seen as something that was out of the control of the individual, like a heart attack, for example. And therefore, it makes you search for meaning. Why did that person end their life? And unfortunately, there is no real way of understanding ever what truly was going on in an individual's mind in the moments before they chose to end their life. And so this opens a can of worms. It opens a can of worms in which one can speculate. And speculation is probably the worst thing one can ever do in the context of suicide. What happened? Why did that person do what they did? Because speculation often leads into sometimes very dark alleyways, ones that can actually create a lot more upset, hurt, and anxiety. My suggestion is always to simply be there to help the grieving process. Because grieving will happen. It needs to take its time. We must not pathologize it, but we must also not try and interrogate what happened that led up to the suicide as if that will somehow make the grief any less. Instead, treat the grief like you would treat the grief due to the loss of any other cause of death, and let that grieving process happen naturally. Treat the suicide as if it is just any other cause of death. That would be my prescription. That being said, of course, there is no right or wrong way to help someone grieve a suicide. And I would love to hear what others have to say in this regard.
Thanks, Vikram. I mean, I just want to maybe give our attendees a moment to respond in case anyone would like to. I think just to say, speaking from personal experience, something that I have found quite helpful is to find other people who've either experienced something similar or to talk with others and explain how you're feeling. But I think the point that you made earlier and something that I have found most helpful is exactly how you described the listening. So for those who just listened and didn't try to solve the problem, I think I found that most helpful. But if there's others who'd like to share any thoughts around this, that would be helpful. We leave the chat open. I can read out the next question in the meantime. This is one that we receive quite often, though, which is how do you help someone who is showing signs of being mentally distressed, but doesn't share this with anyone or does not want to consult a therapist because of the stigma that people attach to mental health or help seeking?
Yeah, this is very common. First of all, I would say that the very fact that you know that somebody is going through a mental health difficulty is a signal that you are a very sensitive and compassionate and attentive person. Most people don't even notice. So I would say to be aware that someone close to you may have a mental health problem is itself a signal that you are doing something very helpful for that person. Validating that what you're observing, hey, Vikram, I've noticed in the last week, you've just been really quiet. You haven't been coming out in the evening, to walk in the park, making an observation, just an observation that suggests that you're concerned about that person is a very, very powerful action in and of itself, rather than ignoring it and hoping it'll just go away. No, I would say being much more open about what you've observed is a critical tool. The second is allowing that person to then tell their story. And as I mentioned earlier, telling a story it can never be forced. It has to happen in a way that the person who's telling the story feels comfortable in the pace, the content, how much, etc. And I think you just need to be there to listen to it rather than needle and wheedle them and say, no, can I hear more? Can I hear more? Just listen, validate, confirm that you've heard. If need be, paraphrase what you've heard, and wait. If they want to tell you more, they will. If they don't, you always have the opportunity to say, let's meet again tomorrow and have another chat. Along the way, this is the way you build trust and confidence to begin to suggest that the person could seek help from someone else. Remember, help seeking doesn't have to be from a mental health professional. It could be from any caregiving person who you believe might have a way to support this person. Let's take an example. Many young people's mental health difficulties may be related to a breakdown in a relationship. You don't have to see a psychiatrist for that necessarily. You could see, for example, a college counselor, or you could see some teacher who you trust, with whom you think the person will have a good relationship. So someone else who's relatively independent from the problem and you feel could provide a non-judgmental and supportive intervention for the person who's in distress.
Thanks, Vikram. We take the last question, and I think this ties in with the point that you were just talking about. So the question is, struggling with the loss of relationships can be devastating. It can make us wonder what's the point of carrying on. So what is your advice on how to think about this and tackle this?
Well, I mean, I think one has to think of life in its fullest way when you think about any loss. The loss is, of course, at the time that it happens, feels like it's all of your life. But of course, you've got to step back and count all the blessings, all the other things, all the other relationships, all the other reasons why life is meaningful and purposeful to you. Taking stock of your life rather than allowing a single loss to actually overwhelm everything else that's going on in your life would be a very important tactic. Thanks, Vikram. Thanks again so much for spending your morning with us. Thanks to everyone who has joined. We look forward to having you with us tomorrow. We begin at 11 o'clock. So for those of you who did not get a chance to see the exhibition or hear from the artists, you can join us tomorrow at 11. And the session schedule has been posted in the link. The full schedule is up on our website for tomorrow. Thanks again, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.